live.
And now we're
Like
live.
it made me sign into YouTube and then it just is doing it.
You're saying it's well designed?
Uh I think it's okay. I think it's okay.
That's high praise.
Yeah. I mean, it's got the stupid Zoom thing in the corner, but you know. Um Whoa, somebody signed in from another device.
As in someone's watching?
No, as in like somebody took over the Zoom account for probably a meeting, but it looks like we're still going. So
That's weird. Is there something on the calendar? I don't know.
yeah.
I don't see
I
it.
mean, the Zoom's quality sucks. That's the only thing. But all right. So I'm glad that you agree that this should be a pilot um, for a series. And I do think we might be able to get away with just shooting the beginning. But right now, I just want to discuss the story. So I had this idea basically in the first episode. I think over the course of the episode, the opening thing happens, and then the two people who were introduced at the gas station, halfway through, we see something happen to one of them. And then at the end of the episode, we like imply that the other one is going to do something and we're like scared. And then they kind of ends the episode. Right. So, and by those two people, I mean the clerk and the guy who comes in and rescues the situation.
The other guy pumping gas nearby. Maybe.
Yeah. Or
Potentially.
I sort of was thinking that guy should just be like, I don't know why, but I've got a picture of just like a hillbilly who lives next to the gas station. Like I'm picturing one of those roads, like I'm probably just picturing Southern Delaware because we're near Southern Delaware, but like, one of those roads down toward the beach where it's like just kind of, you know, hillbilly.
Yeah.
And there's like a gas station, but there's like a rundown shack next to it. And I was thinking the guy has a pit bull. That's kind of like a menacing, kind of like not very attractive pit bull. Um, and then my idea for what would happen like halfway through the episode is that the guy um attacks his pit bull and is killed by him. We don't see it, but he gets killed by his own dog.
Okay.
Um and you're like, well, why did he get killed by his dog? And then they go and they investigate. They the dog was taken away and put down. And this is all just background. And then I was thinking our investigator would be like, well, what happened to the dog? Like, can I see the dog? And they're like, well, we disposed of the dog. And the investigator's like, let me go see the dog. Goes and sees the dog and sees that like he had like attacked the dog in some way. Like you can tell that the dog was like defending itself, not the other way around.
Yeah.
and and then at the very end of the episode you've got the clerk who gets, let's say, I don't know, I keep coming back to like kids, so I got to figure it out, but basically I wanted the person to be like, you just kind of cut like cold to them again, and they're like in their house and something is starting to like agitate them, and then like the episode ends
Wait,
like you
which
don't know.
you say
You
the
don't know.
kids at the end?
No, I was thinking the gas station clerk is at
Yeah.
like her home or something, and maybe we can't just keep coming back to kids. I don't think because it's too on the nose. But the stereotypical idea would be, or I should say, the obvious idea would be that like her baby is crying, and it like wakes her up, and then it like,
Let's
and then we cut.
let me narrow some things down. So like this issue that these people are having, this problem, uh, is it only toward other living things? Or let's say that she's like eating dinner and there's like a radio on. and it starts getting staticky? You know, does like the aggression come out against non-living things?
I guess it would, right? Because people get angry at inanimate objects all the time.
Yeah.
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 So yeah, because I think that's like a subtle way to show, not subtle, but a more subtle way to show that something's happening rather than like immediate aggression toward another human being.
That's right. No, I like that.
Or it could be like
Uh,
the cash register drawer like won't latch shut the next day.
that's pretty good. That,
Yeah.
that that that's pretty good. And then gets like just psychotically angry at it.
You just cut to an
Um,
exterior shot and it comes flying through the window.
yeah, although, how much comedy you want to lean into. I think it's a pretty I think it's a pretty serious tone. Well, and then, obviously the biggest thing that needs to be decided is kind of who are the main characters, who are going to follow this through. And the way I was trying to look at it is I wanted, if I was doing this as like a, Law and Order procedural, like show that's on, ABC or whatever. I don't know what channel
Yeah.
shows are on.
Yeah. Yeah.
That it would have like the woman who is like a domestic violence specialist and came from a background where her dad was abusive or something, and so we she has that kind of memory of her dad like beating her mom or beating her or her and her siblings, and that's why she became why she entered this field and why she's passionate about it. And obviously that opening scene would be like a domestic violence thing. She'd be investigating that guy. And then um and then I was thinking like there would be a partner, and the partner came from, and again, this may be too obvious because it's like every cop show, but
Yeah.
maybe that's fine. Like maybe who cares?
I mean, if you want it to be less obvious, it could be like an ancillary character, like it's a detective that just works in the same precinct as the woman who has like a history of abuse, like kind of overhears about like this case. She wasn't assigned to it. You know, it could start with like an indifferent cop that doesn't see anything strange going on or something. We don't have to like throw all the main characters out at the very beginning, you
Sure.
know?
Well, my idea for the cop, the other person would be uh basically someone who came from like the streets, who was familiar with gang violence or stuff like that. And maybe we like switch these two. So maybe like the main investigator, um it's so funny because it's sort of like we know what the story, I think it's always a real challenging thing when you're figuring out a story, because you know what the story is and why it's cool and interesting, but actually what matters in the end more than that is going to be these characters and what their journey is through the show.
Right.
And um and so it feels arbitrary to be like deciding things about them like this, but I think it works. So I remembered now I had flipped them in terms of gender. So my thought was that the main character was a guy who had grown up with an abusive father, and came in to kind of investigate. And then that the cop who had come from violent neighborhoods. And the reason why I want to loop that in, have you ever heard the statistics about lead and violence?
No, as in like high lead content and paint causing
It's
violence.
it's crazy. Like they figured out that they could correlate lead in the air in communities directly to how, like, double controlled studies that proved that lead was causing people to be violent. So I'm just interested in that, as a because again, we're exploring this idea of culpability and like, are we responsible for our own actions, to what degree, and you know can people actually
Yeah.
control themselves? um so anyway, those were the two people. And um but yeah, how do we make the obviously by the end our main person is going to get the virus and is going to be in a situation where they need to learn to control themselves. And by the way, the end game of the whole thing, I you tell me what you think of this, but um and this is certainly related to my own kind of experience. But the end game is actually, I think that everyone gets the virus and that they have to learn to do certain things to control, like they have to practice. They maybe this is like too far, but basically like it ends up being a good thing that everyone got the virus in the end, because it forces everyone to be like extra vigilant about their own anger. So they all have to become like spiritually well.
Is it, do we want to find out what's causing it? I mean, your example about lead, right? Wouldn't work for this, because this has to like cover all social strata and like socioeconomic classes.
Oh no, this is a virus.
Okay, it's a straight virus.
Yeah, it should just be the simplest thing that it could be, which is a virus.
Okay.
Or I don't know, an amoeba. Like, could it be like a weird thing? Like,
Amoebas
could
are
it be a
scary,
brain amoeba because that's harder to detect?
usually fatal. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
actually, maybe it should be an amoeba because they wouldn't test for that, right? It should be less detectable. Where if it were a virus and all of a sudden everybody was being crazy, but they would test for a virus, and if the virus wasn't detected, they probably wouldn't check for an amoeba, right?
I have
I
no
don't know.
idea. I
I
have
don't know
no
anything about
idea.
it. Yeah.
I mean, if they could, if everyone was being crazy and they couldn't find a virus, they would look for other things that could cause it. They'd look for like bacterial infection that affected your brain stem and things like that.
But they
I
would
mean, it could be a bit.
probably they would probably research every other thing first, right? Like half of people would think it was like a would think it was like caused by social political problems, right? Like half of them would think it was caused by spiritual problems. And I think this gets interesting, right? There needs to be a religion component to this show.
Oh
um
man. Okay.
well, and actually I was thinking that the main guy who at the beginning attacks his kids, I was thinking, how can we make this guy like the most wholesome guy? And I was thinking he's literally a pastor, but like at a cool like you know church, like nice church guy.
That guy, when you were telling me about that first scene, I imagine that he is in and out. Like I thought he was just a one-off kind of
He is.
character.
He is.
So
You
are
know
you talking
why?
about? Yeah.
You know why? Because I think in like episode 3 or maybe episode 2, he kills somebody in his cell at jail. Right. So like they're like I want that to be the kind of end of him. I don't know if he gets studied forever. I do like the idea of him just being a one-off and gone, but you could see great scenes where they like realize what the problem is or something, and then they realize with the audience at the same time that like someone is in danger, right? Like those type of scenes where they're like, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, no, I do. I'm just trying to imagine how you'd bring someone back from such a like a intense moment in the beginning of like a pilot or something. Uh,
But that's why, but that's why I feel like that it's I think that that guy actually needs to stick around for a little bit longer, because it's the relation. First of all, he's the vector. He's the one spreading the disease, and we don't know that yet. We're just talking to him. And actually, you could do stuff like they pass, they're in a
yeah,
interrogation
yeah,
room and they pass like a drink to him and he like drinks it and somebody else grabs it, and you don't know why you're like emphasizing these things touching each other, because you don't know that it's a virus. And
yeah.
then
Well, remember
later
that
on,
happens in the convenience store too, in the gas station. He hands money to the clerk,
that's
who also
right.
becomes a vector.
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing is, remember, I feel like because our main person is our investigator is talking to him. I like the idea that the investigator just kind of assumes, because of the nature of the crime, like out of the gate is just like, well, this guy's a piece of shit, but then keeps on kind of digging and like learning more and finding out like what's going on here, like something's weird here. And then it made me think, like, should the other person not be a cop? Should the other person be a doctor? The other person's probably should be a doctor.
Could be something less related. Could be like a social worker that came because there were kids involved or something
But
like that.
that's what our main person is, right?
Oh, a social worker. Oh, the person from the streets.
No, our
Is that?
main person is probably a social worker. That we've been calling them an investigator, but
Yeah, that's.
they really should just be someone. I don't know. And this is the other thing. I don't want to get totally sidetracked with. Actually, I could talk to our. We know someone who worked with domestic violence victims and ask her what's appropriate, like what's the setup, like
Yeah,
how are those people offered services.
I like I like it when people are out of their depth. So like Silence of the Lambs, right? Was a great movie, and one of the things that made it great is that what's her name, Clarice Starling, was like just out of the FBI academy and ended up in this like ridiculously hostile environment. And it was like, I think if she had been like a superstar FBI agent, you wouldn't have cared. It would have been like way less interesting. But because
Right.
she was like victimized during the thing too, it was way more uh it made you feel a lot more.
So what if, because we're in the middle of nowhere, there's like no social workers who want to work there, or whatever, or whatever, they don't have room for any social workers, so this person is just like the one person who goes and like talks to victims around these things. And maybe, what's their chip on their shoulder, right? Like, where did they come from, where do they want to be versus where they have to be, etc. And
Yeah.
I think I want this to be a guy, just because you wouldn't think it would be a guy.
Yeah. Well, I like the idea of it being someone that's just there by default. Like they just land there because they didn't seek it out. They were
Right.
just told to go because they're the only ones there. The chip on their shoulder.
Right.
I don't know. I'm trying to imagine like what people, I'm thinking about like central and southern Delaware, which is exactly what you're describing. Um, I don't know. I mean, the people that are there for the most part have lived their entire lives, right? They haven't gotten out. Maybe feel trapped. Um, I don't know. Do they need like a big deep-seated issue for this to be interesting or compelling?
Not necessarily, and I mean, this person has one built in, which is that, and like, they assume that there are some people who are just bad people, like their dad, and that there are people who are good people like them. And by the end of this series, I think the point I'm exploring, and I'm not going to say I've like decided one way or another, you can't really know this, but
Yeah.
that at the end they're going to flip, or they're going to at least deeply question that. And so I think the fact that they came from that background is enough. That's enough. But you know, if it's a show, I think there are a number of relationships you have to navigate. You have to have more depth going on than just they're trying
Yeah,
to
yeah.
find this case. And so I want the person to have other stuff going on.
I mean, what are the common things that could deeply affect a social worker, right? Like they worked with a kid that didn't make it, or they had their own personal history when they were a child. That's what drove them to be a social worker in the first place. Or they have like a still living parent that is abusive or alcoholic, um, or doesn't talk to them because the social worker like became abusive toward them at some point and is still trying to like win their forgiveness.
Well, and then also the other thing that gets introduced here is like, let's think about the implications of this thing. If this thing exists and it is what it appears to be, this is a public health crisis. So, like, and it's a big deal, right? So, but what I would want to do in that case, I don't want the story to get big, right? We don't want to bring in this
Yeah.
in about Dr. Fauci and the president, right? So I like the idea of what if the what if the story, even as it spread beyond southern Delaware, what if the whole story was told just from the perspective of that area and that point of view? And that's actually where it started. But no one knows that's where it started because nobody even actually believes in it until they come back and trace back to the beginning. And then I don't know. I don't know.
No, that's good. I do like the idea of, well, I like the idea that at some point when this gets bigger, our main character is our gateway to see that it's bigger, like that we see through them that it's happening in other places, but the local area either doesn't want to believe or doesn't pay attention to what's happening. So I like that no one else in the area really knows what's going on outside, but that's not because they can't know. It's just because they don't, or they don't want to. But like through like an iPhone or something, or radio in the car, like through our investigator or counselor or whatever it is, we can tell it's getting bigger. I like that idea because you're like setting up this feeling of severe isolation and almost like uh frustration, like as the viewer, because you're like, how can you not pay attention? Like, how do you not care what's happening outside? How does no one know what's happening? And that would also make the counselor very frustrated also. Like I would imagine they would become more and more frustrated. But you don't want them to be like, aren't you paying attention? Don't you know what's happening in New York?
Right.
Like that's what we're trying to avoid, right? We're trying to just focus on what's happening
Yeah.
in that place.
Yeah. And well, and now I'm thinking, don't we need to have don't we need to bring in um mass shooting? Like which has at times up until the last year in COVID has felt like a pandemic, like where there's a shooting every week, right? There's some psycho.
Well, yeah, if the goal is to make this the single most controversial television series in the history of television series, you can bring in are we responsible for our actions and mass shootings on the same page.
Look,
uh I mean,
I,
it is an interesting thought.
look, here's my, if you want my actual opinion, like if I had to, if you were, no pun intended, if you were holding a gun to my head and I had to answer this question, it would be that there is no such thing as free will, because basically free will is a magical thought. Like the idea that you, that what you do isn't simply cause and effect like every other thing that we have in the observable universe.
Yeah.
um i would I would now, it doesn't change how you can't really do anything with that information
Yeah.
other than potentially maybe have a little more forgiveness of bad people. Not forgiveness, but
Yeah. You could have
empathy,
like
that you
empathy,
know
yeah, like a tiny bit.
that obviously whatever was wrong with them and all the things, and some of the things were arbitrary. I mean, some of the things were like, they were abused as a kid and then later they abused somebody, right? But some of them are like, there's literally a tumor pressing on their amygdala.
Right.
you know um
Well, I mean, I think you could bring a mass shooting into this in a way that makes sense with the storyline. It just has to meet certain criteria. Like and I don't want to be too specific, but like it wouldn't be premeditated because that's not how this thing works from what we can see so far. It like I could imagine someone being in like a Walmart and at like the gun counter and like just looking at a new handgun, and then someone's like being annoying nearby doing something unrelated to them. I could see like that kind of
right, right,
situation
right, right, right.
setting them off.
I wonder if there should be extenuating circumstances all around that add confusion to the world, so that there's other explanations. So like, I don't have a good salute idea, but you know if it were, I like, oh, one thing I really liked, both also from a cinematic perspective, is to just make it really hot. Like, it's just hot. This takes place in the summertime, and it's like gotten really hot. So I'm seeing, when you look at like a hot thing and there's the wavy
Yeah.
lines, like that's how it should feel everywhere. And the thing about heat is it is agitating, but it also is a proxy for anger. I mean, it's a way to think about anger. Um, but you could see if there was like extreme heat, that could explain, because I know like on hot nights, those are the most common times for shootings in cities.
Yeah.
Um, uh, anyway, um, but I'd like to. I think we can make a couple. I think we can make a couple decisions right now, which is that I do like the idea of having the cashier start flipping out. In fact, that might be the way to end the pilot. You have the cashier back, you're back at the beginning. You're back in the place. The cashier is just there. You're like, what's going on? Maybe you again show some stuff that's like, that's suspicious. Like, what's happening? Are we going to be scared because somebody's going to show up and do something bad, or blah, 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 or they're going to do something bad? And then they're just having trouble with the register drawer, and then it just escalates and escalates to the point where they're just like smashing the
Slamming
register
it.
drawer and they just completely destroy it, and then that just ends the episode and we're like, what the hell's
Yeah.
going on?
Because it could, yeah, and that could also be like a normal reaction. So let's say that like, is it a woman, the cashier, or a man in your head?
Let's make it a woman.
Okay, it's a woman. So there's like this altercation that happens outside when the guy starts spraying gasoline on his kids. someone like tackles him. She sees the whole thing. She calls whoever, 911. And she understandably would be upset by this
Right.
when it was over. So that's the added confusion to make it less obvious that something's going on.
Yeah, but then
So
she
yeah,
goes just past the point that's
just a little bit.
reasonable. Yeah. And
It's
you're like,
it's the
what's
last slam.
yeah. Um, yeah, I think that's a great way to end it. What do you think about this whole like they go to question the guy who was the main witness who tackled the guy
Yeah.
and he's dead. And they're like, "What? He died?" And they're like, "Yeah, it's tragedy. He was killed by his dog." Right? And then they're
Oh,
like
that's the guy.
"Oh, shit." And then maybe they just wipe it under the table like I guess that's it. They talk to the cashier's like whatever. And at all of these exchanges, I do love this idea of like making like meaning out of all of these like subtle moments where you're like, what are they? Why, from a filmmaking perspective, like you
Why are they
don't
so
notice
close?
it, but you notice it. It's like there's tension building about nothing until you realize later, oh, like every one of those moments was somebody potentially becoming infected and becoming a, a vector.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some interesting things we could do, Um, I mean, there's the obvious ones like handing things to each other, but also like extreme close-ups of people's mouths while they're talking to each other in dialogue scenes, just randomly cut in. Could be interesting. Like you wouldn't want to make it too obvious what you're doing, but I don't think it would be that obvious anyways. It would just be a weird thing to like be like here on someone's dialogue scene.
But in the pilot episode, basically what we need to do is, we've got the strong opening scene. Then we need to introduce our main character, and the main character needs to go seek some things out. And we need to get to know them a little bit. Like they need to have some type of backstory. Um, I wonder if we can keep it that small. I mean, obviously there need to be more characters to interact with. Um, but I wonder, like in a tiny place like that, what's the jail like? Like if it's just a small jail and there's like one guard. I don't know.
What are you getting at? Where are you going?
I'm just trying to figure out what to do in the rest of that hour. Like, how do you make the most of that hour? Because I think
Well, that are you
we're
thinking?
setting up a really compelling story.
Yeah, but are you thinking of that scene with the gas station as the beginning or the end of that episode of the pilot? Because it makes a good ending.
That's the ending. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the beginning. Okay.
No, we need all the middle part. We've got the beginning, we've got the ending. Oh no, the first scene of the whole movie is the guy with the kids.
That was my question.
That is the
Oh, then
absolute
it
first
then it
scene.
then it can end on the cashier later. Got it.
Yes.
Yeah, this makes more sense. Okay. Also, just to throw this out, the kids are also vectors wherever they go, potentially. Like maybe kids aren't affected by it, although I think it'd be pretty fucking powerful to see. I should stop swearing. Pretty powerful to see like a kid going a little bit.
Who says you should stop swearing? There's no swearing on this channel or what?
I don't know. It just
To
I
see a
told you my
kid
mom's
going
watching.
nuts.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be like they're not shooting someone, but they're like play fighting with their friend, and then they just like go hard and hit them with a brick, or
Yeah,
like
or you could see them going crazy on their parent who's way stronger than them but they
Yeah.
actually start to get to them, right?
Yeah.
Like that type of thing. Um, like where they're like, whoa, like this is beyond, you know, a kid who's angry, because kids get
Because
angry.
and you've seen that, right? You've seen like I'm sure you've seen like a tantrum start and the parents like halfway amused, but then like the kid escalates and then they get pissed off and the parents like,
Well, then they have to restrain them.
yeah,
The idea is
yeah.
what if they almost couldn't even restrain the kid because the kid was like losing it? And that would be, again, that's a very like upsetting scene, but it would be relatable, and you could kind of see, I think, as many, that's the thing, I like as many opportunities to see people doing things like involuntarily. Like I want to introduce that into the fabric of like everything. um
I think we should be careful not to flood the pilot though. Like you don't want too much
no, I
happening,
want
you
it to
know?
be subtle. I want it to be subtle. You don't realize it, you just
Yeah. Let me turn my
um
phone into do not disturb here real quick. I think we have our shoot tomorrow, and Alexander's copying me on every single one of the emails he sends to talent.
ah um
Okay, so the beginning is the gas station.
and the ending
He's
is the gas
inside.
station.
Yeah.
In the middle, that guy dies. In the early middle, we're meeting our main person. They're going and talking to the guy in jail. They're trying to figure out what happened to him. Nobody can figure out what happened to him. And that's another thing I have to figure out is what is the person's reaction after they've done this? What do they think happened? You know, if they've calmed down since then.
And
Um,
does it happen immediately, or is there a delay?
do they, and are they just like anyone who lost it? Like if you've like yelled at your girlfriend or spouse or something, and you're like, shit, I shouldn't have done that, you know, like but they're just like, whoa, like I completely lost control. I don't know how, I don't know why.
I'm
I
sorry
must
for
have,
almost burning you alive.
yeah, like what would somebody
Tough
say? I
apology.
mean, he would probably just be like, what, he would be at a loss. Because I don't think I want them to be like zombies in a trance. You know, like it doesn't actually change them. The whole point is it doesn't actually change them into evil people. They're just completely unstable.
So something has to set them off, right? Because if they're not constantly unstable, there has to be
No,
some sort
something
of
sets them
threshold.
off. Yeah, something sets them off. And that, so here's where you get fun with characters, right? You one of these characters could be somebody who's just always like poking people.
Oh, Jesus.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And and that could be the cop. So again, I like this idea of this cop who comes from, you know, rough area in a city, and who,
And he's down here now because
I'm thinking
she,
and yeah, she left to get out of, you know, she became a cop, which that's a whole profile. You know what I mean? Like people who come from like Southbridge, Wilmington, and become cops. Like there's not many of them. It's a specific type of person, I think.
Yeah.
And you wonder what motivated that person to do that. But I could see making that person somebody who is the one who figures it out, um, and maybe figures it out by like poking people basically until they snap, and in a controlled environment, and figuring out like, oh look, it's sort of like in I mean, it's a silly version, but in like Inside Out, when disgust makes anger get really mad so that she can open up the thing. Um, like basically a live human version of that. Where like I can make this person lose their mind. And maybe that's how she starts to test people, because they don't have any way of testing.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
This is yeah, I know what you're
I mean,
saying.
this is weird, but I'm just
It's really weird.
it's really weird, but you know. But again,
She's
there's
just
an
walking
opportunity
around
for
saying
you
inflammatory
need
things.
you need some kind of comedy to lighten the you need some lighter stuff in this, I think. And I like the idea of a character who's just getting on people's nerves and knows how to do it.
I'm trying to like imagine this cop character in like a not cheesy way, like
Right.
how she is, because it could easily go cheesy.
That's true.
Mostly because when you say like aggravating cop, I think immediately like gruff New Yorker. It's like the first thing that goes into my mind.
Yeah, well, again, I don't want to make these people just total stereotypes.
Yeah.
But some familiarity is good. And then, because it's a show, that's the other thing. Because it's a show, you need like all these supporting characters. Like that's the downside of a show, is that you can't have, I think you can't have as few characters as you could in a feature film.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could always have, so it'd be good to have either the cop or the social worker have a partner, spouse,
Right.
or partner, and one of them eventually gets infected, but not for a while. And they're
Right.
both involved in, well, maybe they're not both involved in trying to figure it out. But I
Well, and
kind of
what
like the
if
idea of like one of them being a school teacher and uh, seeing it from that perspective.
it just takes, so let's like compare this cop to this. What if both the cop and the social worker have it, but the cop never explodes because she just doesn't get angry that easily?
She's been in worse. She's like
Yeah, like
experienced way
it
worse
takes a
stuff.
lot to set her off. Whereas the social worker, who like claims to be this very in control, and by the way, outwardly the cop might be very aggressive and all those types of things, but isn't actually a hothead. Whereas the social worker, who's like all like about being calm and like is actually like unstable. I think that would be fun to play with. um
Yeah.
well, I gotta go here in a second, but
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think these are good ideas. I love the idea of ending the episode with the inanimate object. That's exactly right, because it's just sort of like, ooh, like what was that? And we still have the mystery of like, I was killed by his dog. What are you talking about? Right. And again, the name of the show will give away something too. And this is the hardest show to name that I've ever come up with. Like, I cannot. Here's what I'm looking for, Jason. I want like a Bible verse that's just like foreboding
And
to
you want
be
that
the
to be the name of the show?
name of the show, like a 4-word Bible verse that just sounds scary. But like, I don't want it to be so on the nose. I don't want to name the show Rage. I don't
I
want
think
to
you should
name
just name it. I think you should just name it Paint.
Paint.
Yeah, because of your lead paint example.
We're not
Just call it Paint.
but I could see calling it like Red, or like um
Brain eating amoeba.
did you
Uh,
did you ever hear the podcast where they were talking about how it's possible that humans didn't used to have the color blue? Are you familiar with this idea?
I have heard this before. Yeah,
And that they actually describe the sky as red and the water as red.
maybe I haven't heard this, and that we evolved to be able to see blue, or that we just perceive it
No,
as
just
something different.
culturally we decided to separate those colors, but before they were grouped together into one color.
Interesting.
And that all of that is like somehow type like mimetically transmitted how we see colors. It's really interesting concept.
That is
but,
interesting.
but yeah, like a name. I really want to name this thing so we can start talking about it in terms of its name. Because the other thing I really like about this concept, I think it's highly commercial, right? I think it's very commercial, but I also think it's very easy to do, right? Like this, this, this pilot is eminently approachable. Like they're all adults. You don't need to find like really, great kid actors yet. Maybe later in the series. Uh, the concept is simple. It's all stuff you could just shoot without anything big budget. You don't need any special locations. It's just easy, and you do it in podunk style, and like town and everything, and it just kind of works.
Yeah, no, it does. I was looking for where the amygdala was located in the brain. We should call it temporal. You
Yeah,
can call it something from the brain.
I mean the word wrath.
It's so like it just sounds like a it that sounds like an NBC 9 p.m. TV show.
No, right. So the other idea would be this. The other idea would be to name it after the town, the fictional town or the
Mm,
regular town that it's in, and have the town have a kind of off name, or the town has a little bit of like
Creekside.
an
Oh,
angry name to it.
an angry name. Uh,
Or like it's just got some weird.
yeah, yeah. No, I know what you mean. Red Meadows. Something.
Yeah.
Red Meadows. All right, we'll think about a name.
Slaughter Beach. That's
Yeah,
actually a place.
yeah, that's in Southern Delaware. If you actually want to place it in Delaware, you can call it Slaughter Beach. But it sounds like people might avoid it because of the name. It
Yeah,
sounds like a slasher film.
Slaughter Beach is a little much. Yeah. Long Neck. What other towns are there in Sussex County?
You can just call it Georgetown, but then it sounds like a political show.
Yes. And by the way, I'm not allowed to name anything Georgetown because I'm from Syracuse.
How about how about Dead Horse?
Dead Horse, is that a place?
Yeah, but it's not in Delaware. It's in Arkansas.
That's fine though. I don't care. Um,
Let's see. Bone. There's a town called Bone Gap.
Bone Gap.
Yeah.
That's too much. But
Or
it's
Young America.
It's a cool name though. Um,
What the fuck? There's a town called Hell for Certain.
what if isn't there's a movie called Red Tide, right?
Yeah, I think it's about. Oh no, I was thinking of Crimson Rising, which is a great
There's
name.
there's Crimson Tide is a movie, which is
Oh, maybe that's what I'm thinking of. Yeah,
Tony
Crimson
Scott.
Tide. Is that the submarine? No.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Okay.
Um,
Junction's a good name. Junction.
Junction.
Yeah, I just like the word junction.
You just like it.
I think like yeah, it like has like visuals for me. Junction.
So Allison's family grew up going to a place in Texas called Junction, and it's
Oh
like out in the middle of nowhere type deal.
yeah,
Um,
used to have a train station perhaps, or just two main roads that cross through it.
maybe. Do you like that? You like Junction?
Junction's a good it because to me it feels small. Like it used to be big at one point, but now it's like forgotten because the ways of trains are like long gone. Yeah,
Yeah.
but it
Junction.
doesn't have that much significance otherwise. And like
Yeah, but it doesn't need to. Like again, if it's the concept for the show is really strong, you don't want a name that's too clearly about it, you know.
yeah,
Um okay,
horse heavens.
let's do this. It's a working title of Junction for now because I don't hate it and because I
Okay,
have arbitrary reasons to like it because it was Allison's vacation place. Her grandparents had like a shack in Junction or like a cottage or whatever on like a
sounds
river or a lake. I think probably a river.
sounds like a nice place to winter.
Junction, Texas.
Junction, Texas.
Um, I think this was productive.
Yeah,
So let's decide on yeah, okay.
yeah. We'll just mull over the characters and other name possibilities. So we got
Um,
our social worker. We got a cop. Got a cashier. Got the dog murderer attempt.
you got the jail, the little jail. Could also
Yeah,
be a
this
county.
is
Like, what if it was a county called Junction?
a county called Junction. I
Yeah, but I
actually kind
guess
of like that too. You think it's too wordy?
oh, like a count, like name it like that. Yeah, probably. That's just too. It feels too like quaint, like you're saying. Like, um,
It feels like what's that other? Is it a book or a movie? A something called something. Very
there's things
famous.
about the word junction that are good. There's things about the word junction that are good. Uh, even from a thematic perspective. I think you might have named the show, Jason, which I pride myself in naming things. So,
Well, I won't be hurt if we change it. It's fine. But for now, Junction. At this junction, we will take a break.
and that's what we will say at the end of every episode.
Yeah.